The black sedan pulled into the parking spot, and the two occupants stepped out into the bright noontime sun. The man and the woman inside had been having a serious discussion about how they were both unemployed and wondered if they should even be treating themselves to such a lunch, which now seemed extravagant to her. And yet the man insisted that things would get better. And with this reassurance, the woman became silent, but secretly inside, the man felt his spirit breaking, and he wished for a sign that things would get better. As the man was stepping away from the car, he thought he felt a whisper to look down at his feet, but the whisper was so quiet that he passed right by it, as it barely registered in his mind, and yet it refused to go away. His wife, having to come from the other side of the car, was just a few steps behind him when he felt, rather than saw, her stop at the same spot where he was supposed to look down, and knowing that if she had seen something lying there, then it must be. The man turned and looked to where she was focusing her attention. It was rare that she ever saw something on the ground, so he searched with his eyes where she was looking at, and he saw a small, bright, shining object at her feet. And as he picked it up, he recognized instantly what it was, and his senses suddenly snapped into full attention, and without a sound he began scanning the pavement for the other. Where was it? Where was it? There it is, a few more paces in front of him, shining like a beacon for him to see. The summer sun was warm and inviting, and the family was still unpacking from their move to this new house. The young boy was excited with all the newness all around him. He had never lived in a house before, and such a large house at that. He was so used to a tiny apartment that he felt lost, so he stayed close to his mother as she continued to unpack her dishes and to fill the cabinets which she too had never had before. Outside, the air was filled with the sounds of children playing in the lovely and green park just across the street. And just down the street, he had seen something new. He had seen a building that was so tall to him that he was puzzled by what it could possibly be. A few days later, after the family had settled down, the young boy asked his mother what that building was that had piqued his interest. His mother smiled at him and said, "That's the building where God lived." The boy was shocked beyond words. His jaw fell open and he began to tremble. He turned and ran as quickly as his shaking legs could carry him out the door and down the block, and he shouted to everyone he saw that he ran past that he was going to God's house, that he was finally going to see God face to face. The boy couldn't understand the puzzled look he got in return from an old woman he passed by. Never mind. After he had seen God and talked with him, he would tell her all about it the next time he saw her. But for right now, his excitement grew with each step he took, and he raced along, going faster and faster with each step. Breathless with excitement, the young boy pulled with all his might against a heavy wooden door, which he was just strong enough to barely open so that he might slip past it. And once inside, he could feel the strange change in the surroundings, the coolness of the air, the shadows, and the quiet that engulfed him, and he thought that God must like it quiet in his house as he ran up the steps and entered the great room. The room was the largest he had ever been in, and it had the highest ceiling he had ever seen in his life. The room was richly decorated with stained glass windows, colorful decorations on all the walls, and in the very front a huge wooden cross with the figure of a man on it. Somewhere near the front of the seats there were side doors which were held open somehow, and from inside the darkened hallway beyond he could hear quiet voices talking to one another. And not wanting to intrude, but also wanting to see everything as closely as he could, the young boy chose a seat near the open and dark doors, and sitting down he waited for whatever was to happen next. Scarcely able to breathe with excitement, the young boy looked around the room and noticed how very few people there were inside. He wanted to leap up and shout that God was coming, but he was sure that these people already knew that, and That's why they were there. So he restrained himself and sat in trembling expectation of his arrival. Surely God must know that the boy had come running to see him, and the boy felt certain that as soon as he finished doing whatever it was he was doing, that he would step out and greet the boy. Maybe those whispering voices, maybe that was him right now, talking to someone, and was just about to step into the room. Time passed. The boy fidgeted in anticipation, scarcely able to believe that he was finally going to get to meet God face to face, and at the same time could not understand why only so few people were in the room with him. Didn't they know? Didn't they know God was going to show up? More time passed. Some people got up and left the room. The boy felt like shouting to them that if they leave now, that they are going to miss it. Again, the boy was just barely able to control himself, and he said nothing. As more and more time passed, the boy began to wonder, what was taking God so long? The whispering from the open doorway had long since stopped, and yet no one came out. He wondered if someone was going to come out and tell them how much longer the wait was going to be. The boy had by now been there so long that the light through the windows was moving around the room, and still God had not shown up. Maybe he's not coming today, the boy thought. Maybe there's just not enough people here today. Maybe he'll come on Sunday when there are more people here. Encouraged by this new thought, the boy, now convinced that God was not going to show up, got up from the polished wooden bench and happily walked home, thinking that on Sunday, with his mother and all the other people, that God would surely show up, and he would finally get to see him for real. That Sunday found the young man especially well-dressed and clean. He had done everything his mother had suggested, and even washed his face and behind his ears with a washcloth and soap. He felt so clean that his skin hurt from all the scrubbing. With his hair neatly combed and his white shirt tucked inside his pants, he took his mother's hand and they walked together to the church as people in groups both large and small assembled into the building. Today, inside the building, it was different than that of the other day. Today the room was filled and the young boy stayed close to his mother so they could both see the same thing as God walked in. A man in flowing robes walked in and began to speak, and the boy asked his mother if that was God. No, she replied, he's the priest. So the boy watched and he waited. The Mass was over and still God had not showed up. And walking home, the boy kept his thoughts to himself. Well, maybe next week, he thought. Week after week, the boy attended Mass with his mother. Week after week, the boy looked around the room, hoping to catch some glimpse of God, wanting to be the first one in the room to catch sight of God entering, so he could shout it out to the room. And each week, God failed to show up. The seasons were beginning to change now. Summer had given way to fall. The young boy began lessons in his new school, and every day the young boy walked directly past the front of the huge white building where God lived, always hoping to catch a glimpse of God, possibly moving between the buildings or even coming out the front door. And still nothing. No sign of God could he find. And yet he had not given up hope. Winter had come with full force. The snow and the biting cold made his skin red and burn. Still, the young boy found himself sitting in church waiting for Mass to begin, because you never know, he reasoned. You never know, and God may just show up, and he was ready. While he sat and waited for Mass to begin, he kept hearing the words the priest had spoken during a previous Mass about a poor woman who had only but a few pennies, and who had in secret and in shame of her poverty quietly slipped those few coins she had into the poor box so that no one might see her small offering, while others flamboyantly produced large and generous gifts to the delight of all the onlookers, to which Jesus, who had seen the poor woman's act as it happened, remarked to his apostles that the gift of the poor woman was greater than all the gifts of the rich, because she had given from her need, and for some reason, these words simply would not leave the young boy's thoughts. And he could feel himself as that poor woman, giving away what little she had. And his fingers slipped into his pocket, and he touched all that he had, a single dime. The Mass had begun, and still God had not shown up. And today, for the first time ever, the boy became angry. In his mind, the boy shouted at God and asked why he didn't show up. Didn't God know the boy was eager to see him? Couldn't God take just a moment to see the boy and to say hello, so the boy could know that God lived and cared about him? If God couldn't be bothered to say hello to the boy, maybe the boy was wasting his time in seeking him. In his anger, the boy was not even aware of the collection plate until the usher tapped him lightly on the shoulder with it. And in the flash of a moment, all time stood still and all motion stopped, frozen in time. And in his mind, the young boy exploded in full anger, and in one last shout to God, he said, all right, it's all that I have. You want my dime? I'll give it to you. I'll give you the dime. I'll be like that poor woman and give you all that I have, even though I have looked for you every day and have not seen you, not even a sign of you having even been here. I'll give you the dime, but I'm telling you right now, that since you are rich, that I want 2 dimes in return today. Do you hear? I want 2 dimes in return from you today, not tomorrow or some other day, today. And with that, time began to move again, and the boy put all that he had into the basket, but his anger had not gone away. The cold air was clearing his head, and the snow crunched under his feet. The more he walked, the slightly better he began to feel. What the heck, he thought. It's only a lousy dime. And with that, he put the thought of ever seeing that dime again out of his mind. I think I'll go see my friend, he thought to himself, and he felt better at the thought of an afternoon of games and fun. Usually the boy always entered the friend's apartment where he lived by the front door because that's where the buzzer was to gain entry into the building. But today, for some reason, he felt that the back entrance was the right way to go. So he followed his unusual instinct and tried to make his way from the alley into the gangway to the rear. But he found that the snow had blown off the 2 garage roofs on either side of the gangway, and that the gangway was as deep with biting cold snow as he was tall. Well, he thought, I feel like kicking my way through this snow anyway. And without a moment of hesitation, he fought his way through the obstacles and continued through even more knee-deep snow until he reached the back steps of the building. A man was shoveling off an adjacent landing when he saw the boy. He raised his head as if to tell the boy not to use the snow-covered and packed steps, but instead he said nothing and went back to his work. The boy now focused his attention on the steps before him, deep with snow, and his eyes scanned the bank looking for the best possible, most easy path, when he noticed in the fresh snow mound a strange-shaped hole, which caught his attention immediately. He had never seen such a strangely shaped and slightly deep hole in fresh snow before, and his curiosity drew him towards it. Could it be an animal of some sort, he wondered? Then in a flash, as quickly as it had came, he rejected that idea. What kind of animal would make its burrow in a snowbank which is here today and gone tomorrow? Besides, that hole is too narrow to be any kind of animal. Moving closer, the boy noticed that not only was there one such oddly shaped hole in the snow, but 2 such oddly shaped holes a few inches apart. Looking down the holes, the boy could see nothing. So carefully using his hand as a scoop, he lifted out the handful of snow that he thought would include whatever it was that was on the bottom of the hole. And he could feel something, but he could not tell what it was, as the snow in his packed hand was melting. He transferred the contents from his right hand into his left hand, and with his now cold and almost numb right hand, he repeated the scooping grab on the second, slightly deeper hole. And now with the contents of both scoops held in a tight clasp between his hands, he waited for the snow to finish melting, and once that was complete, he opened his hands to peek at what remained inside. The man stood in silence for a long moment, his eyes tightly closed, and his wife came and stood at his side. She was smiling a knowing smile and waited patiently for the man to recover. She had seen this before over the years, and each time it had always come at some moment of great distress. She tried to remember when the last time this had happened. There was the one time, a few years ago, when her husband had been forced to quit a job that had nearly broken his spirit and he had no other employment lined up. Then there was the time a few years before that, when they were both riding bicycles, and there had been some other great pressing issue at the time. Funny, she could not even remember what that issue was. It seemed strange to her that what was once such a moment of despair now could not even be remembered. The man slowly opened his eyes. He had been silently weeping, and taking a deep breath, he turned his head to his wife and fought to smile a brave smile. Trying to speak and fight back choking tears at the same time, he whispered, "It's the sign." He then closed his eyes tightly and fell silent once more. She wrapped her arm around his, and together they started once more towards the restaurant. Once again, in a moment of his greatest distress, the young boy, now old, was clutching between his hands 2 dimes.